All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Today, we're doing a bit of all three of those. Right now, so we've got a bunch of groups joining us, some classes that are together. So we've got Miss Wallace's grade 1 group in Jackson Davis Elementary in Eureka, Virginia. Hi, guys. Hi. We've got other groups. We've got Mr. Gerard's group, Mr. McFarland's group, also grade 1s in Enrico, Virginia, Jackson Davis. Hi, guys. I was wondering how long you could hold that note. That was impressive. And then we've got grade 6s, Miss Bowen and Mr. Davis's group in Kitchener, Ontario. Hi, guys. Awesome. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. So we are joined live in Guelph, Ontario by Hayley Tompkins. She is a pollinator biologist at the University of Guelph. She does research on bees, and she works with the Wildlife Preservation Canada group as well to do a lot of really, really neat stuff. So she's joining us for the very first time today. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Hayley, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. As Jesse mentioned, my name is Hayley. And I've been working with bumblebees for a few years now. And so sometimes when I tell people my job, they go, "What do you mean you work with bumblebees? Like that's a job?" And for me, I get to say yes, and it's the best job I have ever had. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about bees in general, and then we'll talk about bumblebees specifically, and then I'll show you some really cool footage from one of my research projects I've been doing this summer. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my presentation so you guys won't see me, unfortunately, but you'll see some really cool photos and videos instead. All right, so my project, I like to call it the Buzz About Bees. So what's going on with bees in the world? For pollinators, it's really important to talk about why they are important. So hold on, Jesse. I'm just going to, some of my animations aren't going to work here since it's not full screen.
That's okay. Take your time.
So when we talk about why pollinators are important, it's because they are responsible for lots of the yummy fruits and vegetables and things that we eat. For those of you who love chocolate, chocolate's also because of pollinators. And this beautiful photo here with all these wildflowers, these wouldn't be possible without pollinators as well. So there's lots of different kinds of pollinators. So we'll just move this out of the way so you can take a look there. We've got moths, we have bats, hummingbirds, butterflies, beetles, and even ants. So there's all kinds of pollinators that exist. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of these guys. So these are some of our wild bees that we have across the world, but I'm going to be talking about North America and mostly Canada today. So in North America, we have 4,000 species of bees. So that's a lot of different kind of bees. And so on the left-hand side, there's a poster there with all different bees of shapes and sizes. Some of them are really, really big. Some of them are really tiny. And we have about 800 of those in Canada and 400 in Ontario, which is pretty good. So we've got a really good diversity of bees. There's also something called social bees or solitary bees. So social bees are those that live in a colony together where they have a queen and workers and males. And then you also have those solitary ones where they actually just live by themselves. So these are some really interesting bee groups that we have. So some of the ones I have circled, we have honeybees, which is the one that everybody thinks about or talks about when we talk about bees. And they're definitely important in the conversation when we're looking at declines of bees, but the more important ones are our wild bee groups. So that's going to be some of our sweat bees, our leafcutter bees, and you can see this one here where I've just moved the circle. It actually carries the pollen underneath its abdomen rather than on its legs, which is pretty interesting. But my most important and most favorite one we're going to talk about today are going to be our bumblebees. So for the bumblebee, they are social. So like I said, they live in a colony together. And up here right at the top, we have a single queen out in the spring. So she was actually born the previous summer. So in about August or September, new queens are born, and they'll actually go into hibernation, and they'll sleep underground all winter long, and they'll wake up in the spring. So the first thing that they have to do is, of course, find food. So you can see this one's on a flower. But then the next important thing they have to do is look for places to nest. And so when they find a nest site, they can start laying their eggs. And so the queens, they have to do all of the hard work at the beginning of the year. So they have to collect all the food, they have to keep the colony clean, and they have to incubate the eggs. And so when they incubate it, they're actually sitting on it and providing heat to them to keep them warm. Once that queen actually has her first set of workers, they will go and do all the work for the colony, and the queen will stay inside, and she's just going to continue to lay eggs until the very, very late summer, when she's going to produce brand new queens for the next year. So the workers, which sometimes people don't know, they're actually all the females. So all the girls in the colony are the ones that do the hardest work. So in Ontario and across Canada, bumblebees are at risk. So there's 5 bumblebees here that are actually listed as at risk. And so that means that their numbers are in decline, and it's getting harder and harder to find them. So the ones in red, we have the rusty-patched bumblebee and the gypsy cuckoo bumblebee. These are ones you may have heard of in the media. And actually, for those of you in Virginia, the rusty patch, we can't find it in Canada anymore. So some of the last locations that we're going to be able to find it are actually in some of our US states. We also have the yellow-banded bumblebee and the American bumblebee that are special concern. So that means that we can still find them, but it's getting increasingly difficult. So we need to keep an eye on them and try to work to protect those species. And then we have the western bumblebee, which lives out west in Canada, and that one is considered threatened. So another one we need to watch out for. So there's a lot of causes for decline. So things like pesticides. So farmers, they use pesticides on their property to kill pests, which are insects that are going to hurt the crop. But when they do that, they also have an impact on our good insects, so our bees and other pollinators. Also parasites and pathogens. So in greenhouses, you can actually get a whole colony of bumblebees shipped over to your greenhouse to help pollinate things like tomatoes, which is really great. But when those bees escape from the greenhouse, they can actually pass on diseases and parasites to our wild bees. Habitat loss and climate change. And what I'm going to focus on for the next little bit is actually going to be that habitat loss part. So our bumblebees and other pollinators, what do they use for habitat? So of course they need food, and so that's both pollen and nectar, so they get that from flowers. It's kind of their carbohydrates and their energy to keep them moving. And then other really, really important parts that sometimes are a little bit forgotten are things like overwintering sites and nesting sites. So as I mentioned, queens that are born at the end of the summer, they'll actually overwinter. So they need somewhere to safely dig into the soil or into the leaf litter so they can hibernate over the winter and wake up in the spring. And then our nesting sites. So bumblebees and other bees have different requirements for where they nest. And so it's really important that we take that into consideration. So when we're actually at home and maybe helping our parents garden, or if you have a garden at school, one of the really important things you can do is actually plant for pollinators. So some of these pictures, they're different kinds of gardens. Some look a lot nicer, some look a little bit messier. And you know what, messy is actually better because that means there's probably really good nesting habitat in there as well. You'll notice there's flowers of different shapes and colors and sizes, and that's really great too because with bees, some of them have very long tongues, some of them have very short tongues, and so they actually prefer different flowers as well. So for me, what I'm doing in my research is I'm actually studying bumblebee nests. So that photo is actually looking inside of a nest. You can see it has almost a little wax bowl in front of it. We call that a nectar pot. So that's where the bees will actually store their nectar. So why we're studying bumblebee nests, because if we want to protect bees from their decline, we have to look at all of those different requirements that they have. And so nesting is part of that. Unfortunately, bumblebee nests are actually really, really hard to find. So sometimes they're hidden underground or in trees or in different structures. And so we need to learn more about where they're nesting and why, so that way we can hopefully provide more nesting sites for them. So we don't really know a lot about where bumblebees nest. And so you can see here, this little bee in the circle is actually going into the cement concrete in someone's front step. So they might be nesting in there. We also have an old birdhouse. And so the bumblebees found their way into this birdhouse, and there's lots of great nesting material in there for them from the birds. And so you can see they've got a whole big colony there as well. And then some bees actually just nest right on the surface. So these orange balls, these are actually their wax brood cells. So it's where the eggs are inside. And they'll just nest right on the surface like that. So my research is trying to figure out where certain species are nesting and why. So these are the kinds of nests that I built. And actually, I didn't do all the work myself because I had to build about 500 boxes. And so what I did was I had local schools, so sometimes kids your age, grade 7s and 8s mostly, they actually helped me build these, which was pretty interesting. They did a great job, and I went and put them out all over South Central Ontario. I had 400 bumblebee boxes out this year. So some of them I dug them underground onto a slope, and then some of them I'll attach them to trees. And then so I spend my time all spring and summer long going back to these boxes and taking a look inside. So it can be a little bit risky sometimes looking in, because with bumblebees, they always have something what's called a guard bee who stands right at the entrance of the nest to protect it. So when I get too close sometimes when I'm taking a look, they're not always the happiest. So this is just some of the boxes that I put out this year, some of the ones I picked up from the schools. And you can see on the right-hand side, that is a little colony box that I had up. And you can see one of the guard bees just poking her head right out through. So she was keeping an eye on me to make sure that I didn't get too close to the nest. So when I'm actually at these sites, I'm looking to see what signs of occupation there are. So the photo on the left, that is the inside of one of those wooden boxes. And those are some real nectar pots and brood cells that the bees have built. They even brought in a bunch of grass inside the colony because I only gave them a little bit of cotton for some kind of nesting material. And so they brought lots of stuff in to make it a really nice nesting spot for them. And then on the right, this is really cool. I mentioned that all the bees have different jobs in the colony. So some of them were collecting food, some of them were taking care of the eggs. This one is actually kind of like a bumblebee air conditioner. So what she's doing is she's actually sitting there and she's circulating air through the colony to help cool it down on a really hot day. Because those nectar pots that they have to store their food, those are made of wax. And when wax gets hot, it can melt. So it's really important that they can keep the colony cool in the summer. So I have a video here. I'm going to see if it'll play. So let's see, I think you guys can see that there. So this is actually it in action. So this is one of those air conditioning bees that I said. She's sitting right in the inside of that tube for the underground box that I put out. And she is just sitting there circulating air through the colony to cool it down. So a really impressive job by quite a little insect. And then this one's pretty cool. There's no sound on this one, but I'll tell you what's going on. This was a box that I put up on a tree, and this is called the confusing bumblebee. So its scientific name is Bombus perplexus. And so this was a really active colony in the summer, and you can see lots of bees going in and out. So they might be dropping off food or leaving to go get more. And then you'll always see a bee or two hanging out pretty close to the entrance doing some nest guarding. That way, if there's any intruders, they've got someone there to protect them. So this is another really cool video. Before I play it, I'm just going to tell you how I got this footage. So that underground nest box that I put out, it had a white long tube at the front. That's actually an entrance so that they can get to the box underground. And so I was thinking to myself, how am I going to get really good footage inside? So what I did was I found a little endoscope camera, things like plumbers use to check out the pipes. And what I did was I just fed it into the entrance of this PVC tube here, and the bees immediately sensed that I was there. So you can take a look here, there's one, and then you'll see another one coming up behind her. So they were actually trying to chase me and my camera right out of their tube. And so she flew right at me, and you can kind of see it gets a little messy at the end there because I did just start to run away because I was stung a few times this summer. And so the bees, they were doing an excellent job at guarding their nests. So I also saw some other really cool things in the boxes that weren't bumblebees. So of course my goal was to get as many bumblebees as I could so I could have lots of nests to study for my research. But I also saw some really cool wasps' nests, and some of them were even underground, which I really didn't expect. In some of my sites that were kind of wet, so the soil was really moist, there was even a red-backed salamander. I had lots of boxes that had tons of mice in them, even mice living in some of the tree boxes, so they were pretty acrobatic mice. And I even had some snakes. So that's a picture of a garter snake there in one of the boxes that I put out as well. So what I'm doing with my nesting research is trying to fill one really small gap in research. So where are bees nesting and why? And so that's my way of trying to help them through this project. But there are lots of things that you guys can do to help bees and other pollinators as well. So you can plant a garden for bees. So if you don't have any gardens at your school right now, maybe you can talk to some of your teachers or the principal to see if you can actually get a garden made for pollinators. And so in this one here, there's lots of different flowers. They have different colors and shapes and sizes. And another really important thing that you want to remember with flowers is bumblebees wake up in the spring. So that's, you know, April, maybe into May. And there's not always a lot of flowers first thing in the spring. So having flowers that start in April and go all the way through until the end of October is really important because bumblebees are active during that entire time. You can also leave your front lawns, leave your gardens, don't tidy them up. So when maybe mom or dad or some of your neighbors, if they're raking all of their leaves up or they're cutting back all their shrubs, you can tell them they can save themselves some work and just leave it be. So lots of bees will actually overwinter in that. So they'll dig themselves into the leaf litter or into the soil, or some of our solitary bees that nest on their own, they'll actually nest in the stems of some of those shrubs. So leaving that will help provide a lot of really great habitat for pollinators. Another really cool thing you can do, and you can't do it right now, unfortunately, because there's no more bees flying outside, but you can join a website. It's called bumblebeewatch.org. And this is a really cool website because all you have to do is take photos of bumblebees and make an account and submit the photos to the website. And then someone like me or a regional expert, so someone who's an expert in the bumblebees in your state or province, they'll actually go online and verify the bee, and they'll let you know what species it is. So let's say you decide to build a pollinator garden at your school, and then you want to know which pollinators are actually visiting it and what kinds of bumblebees you have. You can take photos and upload them to the website, and it gives you lots of really cool information. But the other thing is it's great for researchers like me because it's really hard to find bumblebees sometimes, especially the rare ones. So unfortunately, there's not enough of us to be able to go out and survey everywhere all the time. So people like you can actually help us contribute some really great information. So I mentioned at the beginning there was our declining bee called the rusty patch bumblebee that we can't find in Ontario anymore, but it still is in the States. We've had a few hundred observations of that bumblebee submitted this year alone to Bumblebee Watch. And so it's a really great way to help us keep track of some of our declining species. So this is just one little excited bee at the end, both her arms in the air. Just wanted to say thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed a couple of those videos and some of the images, and I am happy to chat with you now if you've got questions.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Hayley, and I'm sure the classes are as excited as that bee. Let's start with Miss Wallace's group. If you guys have a question to kick us off, come on up.
All right. Who's your question?
How many bees are in the world?
What'd you say? How many? His question is about how many bees are in the world.
Oh, how many bees are in the world? There are lots and lots. So I mentioned we have about 4,000 species of bees in North America. So that's just in North America. So that's not considering everywhere else. So we probably have over 200,000 different kinds. So I work with bumblebees, so they just make up a really, really small portion of all the wild bees that exist.
Excellent. Great question. All right, let's go to Miss Gerard's group.
How many times? Grace, come on over.
I got a question. Okay.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, we've got Grayson here. He's going to ask you guys a question. All right, go ahead.
Hi, Grayson.
How many times did you been stung?
That's a great question. So this year I actually got stung 5 times. And so one time I got stung right in my arm here. Do you guys know who Popeye is?
I don't know.
Well, my arm was really, really big and swollen. It actually looked like I had a huge muscle, like I was a bodybuilder or something, because I'm a little bit allergic to bees, unfortunately. So
a quick follow-up. Where's the worst place you've ever been stung, like the most painful spot?
on my fingers, because there's not a lot of room for the swelling to go. So they get so swollen you can't even bend your fingers. So that kind of puts a damper on field work. I had to take a break for a day or two.
Oh, dear. All right, let's go to Ms. Bauman's group. If you guys have a question.
Come stand up. You can come into the screen.
Yeah, come on up. Oh, I demuted you. I can mute. There you go. You're good. I mute. Yeah, go ahead.
What are those box thingies called that you put the bees in?
Yeah, so they're just called nest boxes. So a really fancy name you can call them is an artificial domicile, which means it's just a house for bees. So that works for bumblebees, but I mentioned there are also solitary bees. And so those houses don't really work for solitary bees. What you would actually do for a solitary bee is if you just took a big block of wood and a drill and just put little holes in it, they'll actually nest in the little cavities in those holes. But for mine, they're wooden boxes. They're about this big. They have a really cool hinged lid on it, so that way I can open it up and take a look inside and see what the bumblebees are up to.
Very cool. Quick follow-up on that. For classes that might want to get one of those boxes, is there a way they can do that? Do they work with a university? Can they get them any other place?
Yeah, so I created a blueprint, so a set of instructions on how you can build your own. So if you're interested, maybe just let Jessie know after, and I can definitely chat with you. It's a little bit harder for our Virginia schools, but I will be making some more boxes again this spring, and Kitchener is very close to Guelph, so if you guys are interested in helping to put a few together, that would be great. Just let me know.
That would be great. Super cool. All right, let's go back to Ms. Wallace's group. You guys have a second one?
What's your question? Question, guys. Okay. Pick on. We're finding one. Okay.
Oh, take your time. No hurry.
I'm not going to ask you a question. Say, my name's Raine.
My name's Brady. And why do bees sting?
Why do bees sting? So bees, they don't really want to sting you. They're only going to sting you when they're trying to protect their nest or protect themselves. So the only times I've ever been stung was always my fault. It's because I was opening the box to take a look, or one time a bee was actually on a flower and I put my hand on it. I didn't see her there and she stung me. And so something that's really cool about bees that sting, it's only the girls that can sting. So boys, they don't have stingers. So one of my cool party tricks is, and don't try this at home because I know the difference, but when I see a boy bumblebee, I can actually just pick him up in my hands and he won't sting me because he can't.
Very cool. I have to follow up on that. How can you tell? I mean, not for the classes, but how can you tell as a professional?
Yeah. So male bumblebees, they are longer. So on their abdomen, which is kind of like their belly, they have an extra section. They also have an extra segment on their antenna. And on their legs, they don't have a section it's kind of flat and wide, and that's where the females will actually collect the pollen. And males don't have that. It's called the corbicula, or the pollen basket. And so once you know what you're looking for, it's easy to spot. If you see a bee carrying pollen right away, you know that it's a female. Just because it doesn't have pollen on it doesn't mean it's not. She just may not be collecting any pollen at that time. And one thing about stingers too, I'll add, is sometimes people think that as soon as a bee stings you, it dies. And that's not actually true for a lot of bees. So bumblebees have a stinger that's just like a pin. So when one of them stung me, she grabbed right onto my sleeve on my arm, and she stung me probably about 3 or 4 times before she flew away. It's only honeybees that actually have hooks on the end of their stinger that get stuck in you. And the reason why those ones die is because their colonies are actually in the thousands. So they have thousands of bees in a colony. So it's not so much of a big deal when a couple of them die if they sting something and they don't make it. But with bumblebees, their colonies are only maybe 30 to a couple hundred at once. So they don't want to lose any of the bees.
Interesting. Very cool. All right, Miss Gerard's group again. You guys have a question?
Oh, hey.
All right, here we go. We got Albert here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why do bees collect honey?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So what they're actually collecting is the pollen and the nectar from the flowers. And so that's their food. And with honeybees, they'll actually bring that back to the hive and they'll make the honey. And so the reason why honeybees make so much honey is they actually live all winter long in the colony. So there's thousands of them in there. They stay in there over the winter. And because there's no flowers out right now, because it's starting to snow, it's getting cold, there's no food for them. So they need to make the honey and store it so they have something to eat all winter. Bumblebees, they don't really make honey. They have about a tablespoon or so at a time in their colony because they don't live all winter. So they only need to make enough for a rainy day.
So if they don't live all winter, if they all die, how do we get them for the next spring? Where do they come from?
Yeah, so at the end of the summer, the queen, she produces the new queens. So they're the next generation queens. They're going to go and mate with a male from another colony. And then they're going to dig themselves into the first couple inches of soil, and they're going to go to sleep in the ground for the winter. And it's those queens that'll wake back up in the spring after the snow melts, and when the first flowers start coming out, you'll start seeing those really, really big fuzzy bees flying around, and those are our queens that were born in the previous summer.
Super cool. All right, let's go back to Kitchener. You guys have a second question?
All right, Aiden.
Is there different kinds of honeybees, and if so, what's your favorite kind?
So for honeybees, honeybees aren't native. Do you guys know what native means?
You guys know what native means in Miss Bowman's class?
Yes, we do.
Yes, they do. Very enthusiastically.
So for all my grade 1s, then native, that means something's from there. So it was always there, it belongs there. Honeybees, they're not native to Canada. So we never had honeybees here. So they were brought in from Europe or Africa as well. So most of the honeybees that we have here in Canada are European honeybees. And you know how I mentioned in North America there were 4,000 species of bees? Guess how much of that is made up of honeybees? Just one. It's only one species of honeybee that we have here that's been brought in. And so 1 out of 4,000. So when we talk about why it's important to conserve bees and native pollinators, I really try to shift the conversation away from honeybees and bring it back to some of those native bees that we have here that make up those other few thousand that we have. So I definitely don't have a favorite honeybee, but bumblebees, my favorite bumblebee is probably the yellow banded bumblebee. And I think that's because when I started working for Wildlife Preservation Canada, they're actually an organization that does hands-on species recovery. So I actually got to help with the captive breeding. So we'll actually raise bumblebees in a lab, and hopefully when we perfect our techniques, we'll be able to reintroduce them into areas where the populations are low. So that was a really cool experience for me. So I think that one has the special place in my heart.
Very cool. All right, let's go back for one last round of questions. So we'll start with Ms. Wallace's group. Oh, everyone.
My name is Talha. What happens? My name is Talha. What happens to a bee that loses its stinger?
Yeah, so honeybees, when they sting you, their stinger will usually get stuck in you and it kind of rips it off the end of them, unfortunately. So those bees will die. But all the other bees that can sting you, they just sting and fly away. So they won't actually die. They're not hurt by it. As long as you don't kind of squish them while they're trying to sting you, they'll fly away and be perfectly fine.
Good question. Glad we got that brought up.
Yeah.
Right, Miss, I'm surprised it took so long. Miss Gerard's class, you guys have a third question? Come on up.
All right, yeah, here we go.
How do bees know where they live?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so when I go to all of my boxes and I'm watching them all summer long, those are some of the things I'm trying to pay attention to see what the bees are doing when they leave and when they come back. And so one thing that we know that they do, when they leave their entrance, they'll actually kind of circle around a little bit and they'll go, okay, there's a really big rock to the right-hand side. There's this kind of vegetation on the left. There's maybe a wooden stump here. So they'll actually take a look around and try to orient themselves so they remember where they live. But one thing I'm hoping to study this coming year is the smell. So do bees recognize smells? Do they know where their nest is, or do they reuse nests that they've been in because of the scents of the bees there previously? But that's a really great question.
Yes, it is. All right, let's go back to Ms. Bowman's class. Third question for you guys.
All right. You can introduce yourself. Say, my name is Kiana.
My name is Kiana, and why did you decide to become a bee biologist?
That's a really good question. And for me, I always tried to get involved in different things in the environment. So I actually thought I wanted to work with fish and invertebrates, the benthic invertebrates, so the little insects that live in the water. So those were things that I was really interested in, but I just happened to get a job one summer when I was in school making pollinator gardens and bee hotels or bee condos. And I really loved it so much. And then I found a job working with bumblebees and it kind of stuck. So I did that for a few years and I really, really loved it. And so that's why I went back to school. So I'm doing my master's right now. And so for me, it's just about if you guys get an opportunity and it maybe wasn't something you set out to do or you didn't think you'd be interested in it, just try it, make the most of it, because you never know, it might be something that you love and you end up doing for the rest of your life.
Very cool. You know what? We did all three of those questions in 2 minutes, and I know some other kids had the hands up, so let's go back to one last round.
Yeah.
We'll start with Ms. Wallace's group. You guys have a question?
Okay.
10 hands up.
Get up there, little girl. Say your name. Now come out.
Hi, my name is Kaylin.
Hi.
What's your question?
What do the bees eat?
What do they eat? So bees, they're going to eat the pollen and the nectar from the flowers. So usually the pollen is just for the eggs and the developing bees. So they're called larvae. So when they're growing into adult bees, they eat the pollen and it helps them grow, make them really strong. And then usually when bees are just out flying, so they're visiting flowers, they're adults, they're usually just drinking the nectar, and that's for energy for them. So they get all of their food from flowers. So that's why it's really important that when we want to try to help pollinators, so bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, it's really important to have lots and lots of flowers for them, because that's where they get all of their food. That's like if we lost all of our grocery stores tomorrow, or our farms or farmers markets, we wouldn't really have anywhere to get our food.
Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned nectar and pollen quite a bit. Is it fair to say that nectar is sort of just like a sugary drink, like a cola for bees? Yeah. And then pollen, is there an analogy for pollen, like a steak? It's nice and hearty, something that for the babies?
Yeah, it's like their protein. And so, I mean, that's really important in developing bees, whereas with the adults, it's more about energy for foraging, which is collecting food and flying.
Very cool. All right, let's go to Miss Gerard's class. The kid's already ready at the camera. Hi there.
Do bees have a favorite color?
Do bees have a favorite color? So they definitely see certain colors better than others. And so one of the projects that's happening in my lab right now is actually looking at wild bees, so all kinds of bees, and what colors they like. So we put out these things called pan traps. So they're like little bowls. Some are white, some are yellow, some are blue. Those are the best flower colors for bees. And so you'll notice actually in the bowls, sometimes there will only be a certain kind of bee in one color bowl over another. So they definitely have preferences for colors. So white, yellow, blue are really great. But purple, I find bumblebees love purple. I regularly find them on purple flowers.
A quick follow-up to that, just to say, one of the colors you did not mention there is red. Is there a reason for that for bees?
Yeah, so they definitely do. I mean, bees see in a different light wavelength. And so what we've found, though, in order to collect the most number of bees, that white, yellow, and blue kind of covered the full range of all those different kinds of bees and what they prefer.
Excellent. Yes, it's really neat. So a lot of animals can see slightly different than we can. So they can see things we can't, and they can't see some things we can because our eyes are just a little different than theirs.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take one last question from Miss Bowman's group. Go right ahead.
I just want to say thank you for teaching us a bit more about bumblebees. And do you have to take all the other animals out of like the beehives that you set out?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. In my research, I wanted to try to get as many bumblebee nests as possible. So I put out 400 this year, and I got 39. So I figured I would need to put out that many to get around 30 or 40. So sometimes I did clear some of the other animals out, but once it was later in the season and they were already established, or especially for the mice, they looked really cozy in there, like they were preparing for the winter. So those ones I did leave behind because I was a little bit worried they wouldn't find somewhere else to live for the winter. But early on in the season, when they've still got lots of opportunities to find places to live, then I would clear those ones out. But alive, they were just placed into another area at the site.
Super nice. Before we wrap up, Hayley, is there any last messages you want to share? I know your presentation wrapped up with things classes can do, but is there anything else you want to tell us about bees or encourage classes to do before we go?
Yeah, I just want to, remind people that bees aren't scary. So sometimes people will be afraid of bees or even wasps. Wasps are also really important pollinators. So they do a really important job as well. And so it's not being afraid of these insects, but respecting them and respecting their space. We live in nature with nature. And so we want to try to do our best to coexist with them. I've never been harmed by a bumblebee when I've given them their space. And if you are interested in pollinators, even getting involved in a little project, like even just taking photos and submitting them to the website is a really cool way to get involved. We certainly, us researchers, we couldn't do all of this work ourselves. It's only because of people like you that plant flowers and keep track of where bees are and how their populations are doing that we're able to do this really important work. So thank all of you so much for being here today and listening. And if you're interested in building a bumblebee box with your class, then just let Jessie know and we'll get in touch.
How exciting. So Hayley, what we do at the end of every Hangout for our classes that might be new joining us, so I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. So boys and girls, if you guys could get ready and join me in saying a huge thank you to Hayley. You are all demuted. So yeah, thank you so much, Hayley, for joining us today.
Thank you for your great questions too. That was amazing.
Yeah, really great questions today, and it was nice to have so many from each class. For our classes, we'll be doing many more Hangouts all throughout December. Hope you can join us soon. And Hayley, you're welcome back anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.